This video is prepared BT Professor Doa Salman. Gross domestic product, or GDP, is a big, important sounding term, but it's actually a simple idea. GDP is the total value of all the goods and services produced within a country's borders over a specific period, usually a year. Think of it as a giant measuring stick for the economy. When we say all the goods and services, we mean everything from the cars manufactured to the haircuts given. If it's produced within a country's borders, it counts towards that country's GDP. GDP doesn't include things produced in other countries, even if they are consumed domestically. For example, a car made in Japan and sold in the United States would contribute to Japan's GDP, not the US GDP. However, the sale of that car in the US would be reflected in US consumer spending, which is a component of GDP. Why do we care about GDP? Because it gives us a snapshot of a country's economic health. A rising GDP generally indicates a growing economy, one where businesses are producing more and people are spending more. Conversely, a shrinking GDP signals a recession, a period of economic decline. Governments, businesses, and investors all rely on GDP data to make informed decisions. Governments use it to formulate economic policies, businesses use it to forecast demand and adjust production, and investors use it to assess the health of an economy and make investment decisions. A higher GDP often, but not always, translates to a better standard of living for citizens. It suggests more jobs, higher incomes, and greater access to goods and services. However, it's essential to remember that GDP doesn't capture everything about a nation's well-being. There are a couple of ways to calculate GDP. One is the expenditure approach, which adds up all the spending on goods and services within an economy. This approach considers four main categories: consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports. Each of these components represents a different part of the economy and how resources are being used. Another method is the value-added approach. This method calculates GDP by summing the value added at each stage of production. For example, the value added by a car manufacturer would be the value of the finished car minus the cost of the parts purchased from other firms. Both methods should, in theory, yield the same GDP figure. The expenditure approach focuses on where the money goes, while the value-added approach focuses on where the value is created. Section 4. The building blocks of GDP. As mentioned, the expenditure approach to GDP calculation focuses on four key components: consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports. Consumption represents all spending by households on goods and services like groceries, cars, and entertainment. Investment includes spending by businesses on capital goods like machinery and factories, as well as changes in inventories. Government spending encompasses expenditures by all levels of government on goods and services, such as infrastructure projects and public education. Finally, net exports represent the difference between a country's exports and imports. A positive net export figure means a country is exporting more than it imports, while a negative figure indicates the opposite. Section 5. Real versus nominal GDP, adjusting for inflation. When we talk about GDP, it's important to distinguish between nominal GDP and real GDP. Nominal GDP is calculated using current market prices. However, inflation, a general increase in prices over time, can distort GDP figures. To account for inflation, we use real GDP. This is GDP adjusted for price changes, providing a more accurate picture of actual economic growth. Real GDP allows us to compare economic output across different time periods without the distortion of price changes. Understanding the difference between real and nominal GDP is crucial for interpreting economic data. For instance, if nominal GDP increases while real GDP decreases, it suggests that the increase in nominal GDP is due to inflation rather than actual economic growth. Section 6. Beyond GDP, GNP, and the limits of economic measurement. While GDP is a powerful tool, it's not without limitations. One major criticism is that it doesn't measure well-being or happiness. GDP growth may come at the expense of environmental degradation, income inequality, or reduced leisure time, factors that impact overall well-being but are not captured in GDP. Furthermore, GDP doesn't account for non-market activities such as unpaid work in the home or volunteer work, which contribute to a society's well-being. It also doesn't account for the distribution of income, only the aggregate output. Another related concept is gross national product, or GNP, which measures the total value of goods and services produced by a country's residents, regardless of their location. The main difference between GDP and GNP is that GNP takes into account income earned by a country's citizens and businesses abroad, while excluding income earned by foreign residents within the country. Despite its limitations, GDP remains a valuable tool for understanding economic activity. It provides a standardized measure of economic output, allowing us to track economic performance over time and compare the economic performance of different countries. However, it's crucial to recognize its limitations and use it in conjunction with other indicators to gain a comprehensive understanding of a nation's economic well-being.